Hello ladies, ambies and gents. In this video I'm going to be discussing capitalism, media monopoly and free speech. In September of last year, Jeremy from Democratize the Media put out a video entitled We Need an OurTube, which has very much inspired the title and theme of this video. OurTube in this instance refers to the notion of a publicly controlled social media video site rather than a privately controlled social media video site such as we currently have in the form of YouTube. Noel Plum also recently made a video directed at me on this subject, which I'm going to be addressing in this video.
When you look at Amnesty International, they are interested in governments and sovereign states and them overstepping their bounds, and so that is the kind of definition of free speech that they're going to look at. And you can go back to the 1800s when people started talking about free speech and people like John Stuart Mill. But society is very different now to what it was then, Andy. You can understand then free speech is very much about being able to stand on a fucking soapbox and tell the world what it is that you believe, because in those days public spaces was owned by the government. But the world is very different now. We have things now like YouTube, which is in effect a private public space. It's privately owned, but it's just as much a public space in the way that it acts out as is your local town hall square or your local park. Right, and yet it is owned by a private organisation. There's no government responsible to it, but in effect, these are international public spaces. And so who is the government in these spaces? It's YouTube, it's Facebook, it's Twitter. And so I think we have every justification in looking at these as public spaces and the organisations that are running them as the equivalent to the government. Right, and that the idea of free speech needs to expand to take account of these. And if you go, no, bollocks, our definitions have to remain the same and have to be watertight, well, fine, Andy, right? If you want to go down that line, fine. But the arguments that are being made still fucking exist, don't they? So what do you want to do? You don't want to call it free speech, fine, but the arguments don't disappear in a puff of smoke just because we're not going to use the terminology free speech. So even if you want to be very, very dictionary literal about that and say, no, definitions can't change, we have to stick with a definition that was in place 200 fucking years ago, or the definition that Amnesty International use in a very specific context, which is their sphere of involvement, right? Okay, but what are you going to use in lieu of that? Because the issues are still there, Andy.
Indeed, YouTube having a monopoly, as they do, is a definite problem. Herman and Chomsky outline 5 filters through which information must pass in order to reach the public. The first 2 of which are size, concentrated ownership, owner wealth and profit orientation of the dominant mass media firms, and advertising as the primary income source of the mass media. Now, I don't personally have a problem with calling this a free speech issue, if it's coming from a socialist. When capitalists start calling this a free speech issue, then I have to call foul, quite simply because this problem is caused by capitalism. If you're a free market capitalist who is frustrated and or confused that people, such as myself, repeatedly tell you that free speech only protects you from government censorship, then allow me to explain what it is you seem to be missing. Put simply, if you're a free market capitalist, then the only form of censorship you can logically oppose is government censorship. If you want to oppose private censorship, then you are now telling privately owned businesses what they can and can't do, and thus going against the underlying principle of the free market. It is contradictory to argue on the one hand that means of production should be controlled privately, but then on the other hand complain that the people controlling the means of production privately aren't controlling them in a way that suits the public. Just a mad thought here, but maybe if we want means of production to be controlled in such a way that suits the public, then maybe the means of production should be publicly controlled, i.e. socialism. Something I've noticed about capitalists on YouTube is that when a video they like gets flagged down, they all swarm together and start mirroring said video, initiating what's known as the Streisand effect. When YouTubers do this, they're essentially saying to Google, you don't decide what goes on YouTube. We decide. We are the workers. Without us creating video content, you wouldn't have a site at all. So we have a group of workers uniting as a union, seizing control of the means of production on the grounds that they are the ones who do the actual work here and that there would be no product without them. Yet, these people consider themselves to be capitalists? Really doesn't add up, does it? What's even sillier is that when YouTube start demonetizing and or flagging down videos, capitalist YouTubers actually start attributing this to some sort of left-wing conspiracy.
I'm scared that more and more laws, legislation, things that actually matter and have an impact are being influenced by this regressive left idea of thinking. And I just hope that we can recognize that and not go around censoring everything.
Fucking called it. I called it. Let's explain this. By now, I'm sure you're all aware that YouTube has started telling creators that their videos have been demonetized.
You know, for a long time, YouTube's been the gold standard for allowing its users a robust arena of free speech and the ability to make money off those videos that they make on that medium through things like ad revenue sharing. That era may be coming to an end.
Well, guys, it started. So, as you may or may not have heard, Bering's YouTube channel just got taken down. I've spoken briefly to Bering about this, so I'll tell you what I know. Bering had a completely clean YouTube record, no strikes of any kind, and then out of nowhere today he got 3 copyright strikes in a row. That's a little suspicious, wouldn't you say? Almost like there's a plan behind it.
If you want to truly understand the double standards happening on YouTube with respect to advertising and who's allowed to have ads on their content, so just check out the change they made to their terms of service last year following the slew of demonetizations that I mentioned. So this is one of the things that's considered to be not advertiser friendly. Look at this line. Controversial or sensitive subjects and events, including subjects related to war, political conflicts, natural disasters, and tragedies, even if graphic imagery is not shown.
It's in their benefit to give a very broad remit on what is permitted as free speech, and that way everyone is a winner.
You, me, them, everybody.
Actually, let me rephrase that slightly. Everyone of importance is a winner. You know, everyone except the Hurt Feelings Brigade.
Yes, you can have monetization so long as you have the correct opinions. Following the election, the fake news narrative emerged, and suddenly we were told that the US electorate had been lied to by the alternative media, the genuine fake news purveyors of CNN, BuzzFeed, BBC, who all stood against Trump, who were all in favor of Hillary's plans for a common hemispheric market, open borders, and more big government. Yeah, they started labeling any political dissenters as fake news. Well, that's rich. So Google and Facebook took it upon themselves to begin to define what qualified as the truth.
I would be surprised if YouTube isn't reacting to social justice pressure. And not just social justice pressure. It is technically like regressive left pressure.
The hit pieces started to roll in about political dissenters like Alex Jones, Paul Joseph Watson, Sargon of Akkad, Lawrence Southern, Mike Cernovich, David Seaman, and even John Tron. Then the hysteria was turned to fever pitch when advertising agencies were alerted to all the extremist content that the ads of their brands and businesses that they represented were being displayed on. And the trouble is, their definition of extremist wasn't what you'd think. It wasn't ISIS videos they were complaining about. It was videos promoting nationalism, speaking ill of the anti-democratic bureaucracy that is the EU, pro-Trump videos, and now, would you believe this? In Australia, MGTOW videos, men's rights videos, and videos critical of feminism. Yes, in Australia now, car manufacturers Holden and Kia have pulled their ads from AdSense because they are horrified that anyone would dare to speak out against the Marxist, socially corrosive, misandrist cancer that is feminism.
Now, if you're not the ignoramus that these people are, you might have figured out that the reason YouTube have started demonetizing certain videos is because the companies that advertise with YouTube really don't want their products associated with certain types of content. Not because of socio-political sympathies or anything like that, but rather because it's bad for business. A company trying to sell its new laundry detergent probably doesn't want said product to be associated with neo-Nazism, for example. But they also are unlikely to want it associated to a group like Antifa or anything similar. The deciding factor here isn't whether the content is left or right, rather it's whether or not the content is family friendly. Similarly, non-political YouTubers may also face demonetization if their content contains a lot of swearing, or any reference to anything sexually explicit. Again, notice what's driving this policy. Capitalism, certainly not some left-wing conspiracy. Also, if you're someone whose channel gets taken down for using someone else's intellectual property, it's capitalism that says you can't do that. In a capitalist society, free speech cannot extend to allowing you to infringe on people's copyright. Weirder still, these YouTubers will often compensate for this loss of monetization earnings by using crowdfunding platforms such as Patreon. It's almost as if they don't think private companies such as Google and those who advertise through Google should be dictating to them what kind of content they create, i.e. controlling the means of production, and instead feel that they, the workers, should be controlling means of production. Also, crowdfunding allows content creators to extract a much greater amount of the profit from their labour, given as YouTube isn't taking a cut. Marx would have been proud. Now, Noel Plum has argued that he doesn't believe in a completely free market. He believes there should be some restrictions on how privately owned businesses operate. But this raises a very obvious question. Where do we draw the line? You see, if the line is drawn the moment private control of means of production starts negatively affecting certain individual capitalists, e.g. when certain right-wing YouTubers get their content flagged down or demonetised, then that seems more than a little bit selfish and comes off as special pleading. In that scenario, I believe in private control of means of production suddenly becomes, I believe in private control of means of production as long as you privately control it how I want you to. Also, given as all YouTube really does is host people's videos, if we put the decision as to what content is and is not acceptable on YouTube into the hands of the YouTubers themselves, then what exactly is there left for Google to control? It seems to me YouTube is either to be privately controlled or it isn't. There isn't a lot of room for middle ground.
When we talk about censorship, every time the argument comes back, you know, Facebook's a private company, YouTube's a private company, they can censor who they want. Well, one, you look at Google, which owns YouTube, it's a monopoly. It's crossed that line from being just a private company. Now you have to basically use their services to do anything on the internet in terms of content creation. So it's no longer just a private company, it's a monopoly.
This is why, as I've mentioned in previous videos, I find the concept of conservative libertarianism to be nonsensical. A completely free market with unevenly distributed wealth is what allows monopolies to happen. If you don't want a company to be able to obtain a monopoly on something, such as online video, then you are arguing, whether you like it or not, for a restricted market. Now, personally, being a libertarian socialist, I favour the idea of YouTube and other social media being publicly controlled, not privately controlled. I must stress here, especially to any American viewers but also Noel Plum, publicly controlled does not mean state controlled. I stress, I call myself a libertarian socialist for a reason. Socialism does not mean anything that the state does. State-controlled media, much like privately controlled media, is very unlikely to accurately represent the interests of the public. As such, I believe media should be controlled by the public. Indeed, when free market capitalists complain about private companies and the state collaborating to dictate what is and is not acceptable on a site like YouTube, whether they like it or not, they are arguing in favour of publicly controlled media. So how could that work? Well, we'd need to determine what sort of content and behaviour is and is not acceptable on YouTube. We could do this by each sub-community of YouTube, e.g. the atheist community, the Christian community, the feminist community, the anti-feminist community, the vegan community, etc., nominating a representative, similar to a trade union leader. These representatives would then enter into negotiations with one another as to what each community wants and does not want from YouTube. For example, Noel Plum has told me if I do videos about him that he wants me to let him know about them. I've told him if he wishes to tweet videos I've made about him to his followers, I'd rather he not tag me in those tweets. These are the sort of terms different sub-communities of YouTube might negotiate between one another. YouTubers of varying political persuasions seem to like doing response videos to other YouTubers. All well and good, but there doesn't seem to be an agreed-upon etiquette for response videos, which has led to all sorts of bad blood between different camps of YouTube. This is something that could be negotiated, and an agreed-upon format for response videos could be decided upon. This should hopefully address a rather tiresome and whiny question I have spluttered at me all too often, that is, Who gets to decide? Who gets to decide what constitutes harassment? Who gets to decide what constitutes bullying? Who gets to decide what is and isn't allowed? We all do, collectively, through negotiation. Indeed, in a standard Western democracy, we already see people coming together collectively to change laws and policies by writing to and or petitioning their MPs or equivalent representatives and pressuring them to raise said issues in Parliament. Similar with trade unions. If workers have an issue with a certain policy in their workplace, they can ask their trade union leader to raise the issue with their boss. The difference with an anarchist model, however, is that we remove things like bosses and the state from the equation and instead engage in negotiations on a more level playing field, with no one holding a disproportionate amount of power. This is a much more direct form of democracy. But what if we all simply can't reach a satisfactory agreement? Let's face it, YouTube is huge. There's an awful lot of us with some radically different political views, as well as some very different reasons for being here. It's entirely possible our differences may be irresolvable. Prime example, Bering, who has made it abundantly clear he has no interest in compromising his approach, or Milo Yiannopoulos, who simply doesn't seem to be capable of talking civilly with people, as would be necessary if social media such as YouTube and Twitter were to reach a mutually agreeable set of terms of service. Privately controlled media, of course, is something they have both been shafted by in the past. So, is there another option? Well, in a society where media is controlled collectively by the public, we no longer have media monopolies. So instead of having one massive video website, as YouTube currently is, we could have a number of different video sites to suit the various different communities of video makers. This is another great thing about public control of means of production, as opposed to private or state control of means of production. Funding can be assigned equally to the various media platforms. So if a bunch of people favour very little in the way of restrictions upon a video site, with abusive language, deliberately offensive subject matter, and lots of flame wars, a video site could be set up for that. Similarly, if a bunch of other people want somewhere where language has to be kept respectful, subject matter moderate, and disagreements civil, a video site could also be set up for that. I tend to refer to these two models as the compromising aggregational model and the uncompromising segregational model. As it currently stands, however, YouTube receives the glut of funding, and as such, it has a monopoly over other video sites. It receives this glut of funding through the companies who advertise on YouTube, ergo the means of production are controlled not by those who make videos, i.e. the workers, but rather by said companies. This is why YouTube, rather than being a level playing field which promotes different types of content equally, instead gives priority to content which is drawing in most traffic. It also gives popular channels a hell of a lot of leeway when it comes to terms of service, allowing a lot of popular right-wing channels who make videos that flagrantly disregard said terms to continue using the site, and even to continue monetizing, whereas a smaller left-wing channel would unlikely be shown such leniency. Said right-wing channels, of course, do occasionally find the odd video of theirs does get flagged down or demonetized, and being the spoiled brats they are, act like it's the end of the world, never accepting that it's their own capitalist ideology which has caused such flagging or demonetization. So, put simply, if you're a capitalist who complains about not having free speech on a privately owned website, you're much like a transgender Republican who complains when the Republican president you voted for doesn't support trans rights, or a female Fox News presenter who complains when Fox News cast her out for saying women should have bodily autonomy, etc., etc. In that it's not that the complaint is invalid, but rather that the person making the complaint is also supporting the very thing they're complaining about, ergo is a hypocrite. Additionally, if you're a capitalist who puts up videos complaining about how you're being censored by YouTube while simultaneously gloating about how YouTube can't silence you because there's so many of you and they're going to go bust when you and all your subscribers up sticks and leave, you're either kidding yourself or admitting that this isn't an issue, one or the other. Additionally, if you're about to tell me that the monopoly YouTube have over online video isn't capitalism but rather corporatism, will you kindly fuck off with that shit? As fascinating, and I use that word as sarcastically as is possible, as it would be to go through the ins and outs of the differences between capitalism and corporatism, the simple fact is that YouTube did not achieve its monopoly over online video with the assistance of the state. So no, this is not an example of the wonderful and pure ideology of capitalism being corrupted by the big scary authoritarian state, which protects your private property rights. Thanks for watching. As I said in my last video, if you're one of those people who insists I live in an echo chamber and never expose myself to differing opinions, as you can see from this video and others I've made, I sat through all manner of right-wing shit in order to make it. So don't tell me I live in an echo chamber just because I don't want to waste 2 hours of my life doing a live stream with some shitlord or other, or because I blocked you for making a nuisance of yourself in the comment section. Goodbye.